fact with fiction. We have a lot of Bengali waiters in New York. And we all know what Mr. Kissinger was like in 1971. And this whole story is, centers around the feelings of this waiter towards Mr. Kissinger. And those of you who haven't read this short story, I would urge you to read it. I know that he is equally fluent in Bangla. And you have written stories in Bangla. No, you haven't. Never. Okay. He has written stories in Bangla. They have not been published. Do you translate them into English and then publish them? Or they are still there waiting to be published one of these days? They're just waiting. How many do you have in Bangla? That's a lot. Why don't you publish Qazi Anis Ahmad's short stories in Bangla? Because, the people do translate from Bangla into English and English into Bangla. But something gets lost in translation, So I would urge... Sorry? Who? Yeah. So anyway, so what I would sort of request some publisher in the audience, some good publisher in the audience, I don't know if anyone is here, to, I think will sell very well. But last year, year before last, I think you came out with your novel called The World in My Hands, which is not about 1971. And that's very interesting because most people who start writing, the book about 1971 wasn't Monju's first book or first novel, but most people who start writing think that they have to write something about the nation, about the birth of the nation. But do you have any stories on except for the Good Night, Mr. Kissinger, which is very different from the conventional story of 1971. So let me ask you this question. Why did you feel, why were you not inspired to write, a story about 1971, situated in Bangladesh, because this is, situated through the eyes of the perspective of a waiter, Bengali waiter, Bangladeshi waiter in London. So why did you not feel obliged to write this sort of almost obligatory story that you have to make your mark as a Bangladeshi with a story about Bangladesh and the birth of Bangladesh? And tell us something about The World in My Hands. It's a very political novel. I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. But there's so many books came out that we went to your book launch, and a number of my friends in the reading circle did buy the book. Somehow we never got to discuss it. But why did you choose this very, very contemporary story? And if you read, it's like you almost want a key, at the end. Who is who? And sometimes, one feels very upset that one cannot identify the character in the novel. And are these all based on some real characters, or are they just fiction? So these two questions. And maybe another one, do you prefer writing short stories, or would you continue to write a novel now?
So for me, I'll sort of address all of it, hopefully in one tight summary response. I started writing when I was 19, and I started writing fiction in Bengali, in Bangla short stories. I was a student in America at the time, and the only person on campus who could read my stories in Bangla was my brother. And I would write each story, give it to him, and he would tell me it's rubbish. So, my older brother. So then I would put it away and, valiantly write yet another one. And after 2 years of this effort, I finally decided to swallow my pride and accept the fact that I was neither a prodigy nor a genius, and I should take a course on writing while I could. It was my final term in college, and Edmund White was teaching there at the time. So I wrote a story in English simply to get into that course. And that story was called In the Shadow of a Gulmohar Tree. And I gave that to my brother. He read it and he said, "This is excellent." So that's how, by default, without intention, I discovered myself as a writer of English. And since then, I've continued writing in English. I wrote a novel in the late 90s, which actually at that time I had an agent. It went to the editor-in-chief of Scribner's, etc. And I think if I, quote, pushed or hustled enough, I could have gotten it published. But if I'm honest, I myself wasn't satisfied with the end product. You show a little bit to them, and they got excited, they sign you up. But what I came out with the end, I myself wasn't convinced by. So I put it aside, and I got busy with other things, and I was sort of going through a long self-examination as a writer. And I sort of resumed writing, among others, very much encouraged by Niaz Zaman, who was at that time editing the literary page of the New Age, And also she did a couple of wonderful anthologies, and she was kind enough to nudge me to give her stories, and that's how some of the stories of Goodnight Mr. Kissinger came out. So in some ways, between the ages of sort of 19 and 30, I had gone through I wouldn't say traditional arc, but a more familiar arc of writing, stories and then a novel, although that novel too wasn't about 71. But in some ways, I kind of lived a first life as an author completely in private, because nothing was published and there was neither recognition nor reprimand to be shared in the light of the world. And when I came back to the writing, this was actually my second going, and now I was in a very different place with a fuller understanding of who I was and what I wanted to do. So a number of things that had changed for me during the course of this first incarnation and then a break to take stock was, first of all, I came out of the influence of magic realism. And at the same time, I think I came out of the tendency to what Manju Bhai, I think, nicely put as a tendency to monumentalize. And that can happen certainly with great traumatic events of history, but it can actually happen with a lot of other topics as well, and is often, I think, tempting to young writers because you want to write something that feels big, bold, and exciting. And also because we live in a time where the publishing culture tends to reward or over-reward that kind of work. So for me, once I was 33, 4, and writing these stories, at that point I was no longer expecting to be discovered as the next big thing from South Asia or anything like that, and that set me free. I wrote the stories I wanted to write, and I think at this point the use or access to imagination was much more pure. It wasn't programmatic, it wasn't decided by either any kind of sense of duty to history or other ideological imperatives. It was guided much more strongly by aesthetic needs of what kind of stories I wanted to construct, what kind of aesthetic emotional effect or impact I wanted to achieve, and hopefully was able to convey to most readers, and sheer flights of fancy of ideas that seize you, characters or moments or just little shards of dialogue or anything, image, scent, that captures you, and then you build around it to get a story. So Goodnight Mr. Kissinger for me was a tribute to Dhaka, the Dhaka that we've lost and the one we live in. The collection is 9 stories loosely structured after the Dubliners, which also is 9 stories. The characters, like in the Dubliners, grow older, but so does the city in this case. The first 4 stories are in the 1970s, 80s, and then the title story, Goodnight Mr. Kissinger, is meant to be a deliberate sort of opposite to the whole collection by being set in New York, and then you come into modern Dhaka, the one we live in the last 10, 12, 15 years. This novel sort of continues from that trend and picks up on the episode known as 111 that we went through in 2007-8, that kind of political situation. And what I was interested in is sort of the personal cost of that kind of political moment. In particular, how we are tempted by situations like that, threatened by situations like that, and what it does to personal loyalties, and loyalty in multiple senses. Certainly loyalty to one's friends or family, or where a loyalty is owed, but also loyalty to ideas and ultimately to our ideas of self. So that's what's been driving my writing so far. I've just started on a new novel, and that actually moves even farther away from what would be, quote, expected topics. My next book is going to be set in New York and about what I call the misadventures of extreme foodies.
Thank you so much. You put that beautifully. And one question. Excuse me. What happened to the novel, the aborted novel? Is it somewhere?
It got cannibalized into this one.
I see. Okay. So we will not see it. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. I hope the manuscript is somewhere. 200 years later, someone will fetch it out and say, this is what he was going to write. So that's fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for putting it so beautifully. And the other question I was going to ask, the question I asked Manju, is I know some of your short stories have been translated into Bangla and published, right? But in book form, or no, not yet. So it's in a collection of short stories. The entire collection of Goodnight Mr. Kissinger, will appear in Bangla. Fantastic. And what about this book? Is it going to be? It is okay. So I think that'd be good because we do want people to read short stories and and I hope it's someone else doing it. You're not translating because I think when a writer translates his or her own work, he or she is tempted to change it, and we've seen that with Qurratul Ain Haider, from Urdu to English, and she completely changes the story. Sayyid Waliullah, he completely changed his story when he translated it into English. So it's always good to give it to another person who has to be, true to the original text and cannot really, make too many changes with it. So thank you very much. And now we have, I think, 7 minutes. And I think it would be nice if there were some questions from the audience. So if there's some questions, we would welcome some questions from the audience. Yes, if you just put your hand up and identify yourself and to whom the question is. No, it doesn't seem like it, right? So then maybe we can, since there are no questions from the audience, maybe we can talk a little more. Oh, yes.
Editor of a newspaper, and Kaiser's wife, Natasha, with whom Hissam too was once in love. So there's kind of a very classic triangle there. And as this country, the imaginary place, falls into a state of emergency, Kaiser comes increasingly under legal and other kinds of pressures and threats and even injuries. And Hissam starts positioning himself in interesting ways to see if he can exploit this moment for us interests, on the other hand, towards friend, family. And it's the time of what we call Shab-e-Barat. And I'm deliberately choosing this passage because while this novel is very political and full of intrigues, this is a very small private moment for one of the characters. Of all the religious holidays in Pandua, Natasha's favorite, ever since childhood, was Shab-e-Barat, the night of fortune. It was the night when the souls of ancestors descended from the heavens to bless the pure of heart. With the benediction of unseen souls, one's fate for the coming year would be written. Even sinners could get a reprieve from punishment by praying all night for forgiveness. Believers, even the less diligent kind, would roll out their prayer mats, their hearts aflutter with hope. As a child, Natasha didn't care too much for the prayer or its import. She reveled in the halwas cooked on this occasion and even more in the ritual of distributing them to one's neighbors. In her father's house, the bustle began early. Her grandmother rose before dawn to start the process. She was helped by her 2 maidservants and joined by assorted relatives and neighbors. According to Natasha's mother, the other ladies trundled over mainly to steal the grandmother's recipes. The ingredients were there for all to see: ghee and chickpeas, almonds and eggs, cinnamon and pistachio, yet no one else could replicate her grandmother's wizardry. As a girl, Natasha believed her grandmother to be a benevolent witch who applied secrets and potions when no one was looking and thus bested her admiring peers year after year. When the halwas were finally presented to the family, her grandfather ceremonially sampled a bite from each: nut and carrot, egg and chickpea, almond and tapioca, and her grandmother's most divinely inimitable creation, the nishista. Her grandfather did not succumb to exclamations. His appreciation was expressed in a bright but controlled smile, and her grandmother, too, received the adulation in silence. Through the day-long preparations, through the inaugural tasting, Natasha waited only to begin the delivery of the halwas. Excited to wear her new kameez, she wanted most of all to show off her grandmother's superior treats and be gratified by the looks on the neighbors' faces of wonder and envy, gratitude and delight. Her brothers, much older, were assigned to deliver parcels to the more distant parts of the city. But the immediate neighborhood belonged to Natasha and cousins of her age, who traveled to the grandparents' for the religious holidays. What she remembered best, all these years later, was the time when the power failed while they were still in the middle of their rounds. The streets and houses fell into total darkness, and then one by one, trays of candles began to glow all around the neighborhood. The windows offered the meek glow of kerosene lamps behind thin curtains. On that dark stage, as she watched a parade of flickering lights weave a gentle and ever so slightly unpredictable pattern, the munificent presence of ancient souls seemed entirely believable. Thank you.
Thank you, Karis. That was beautiful. I think, dark novel. It is a dark novel. It's a dark novel. But thank you for reading the traditions of Shab Barat, which are becoming more and more difficult today because of the traffic jam. So we just distribute, sweets in the immediate neighborhood. I think we have kept very well to time.
I'm writing a historical and a political novel, tracing the history from the partition of Bengal to up to now.
Okay, very ambitious. Thank you.
It's a long
so
and
you're going
epic
back.
war.
So,
Yes.
so thank you very much. What about short stories? Are you continuing with your short
Yeah, I
stories?
sort of write in a short story, mapmaker, sort of spiritual feel, in a similar kind of vein. I'm experience in London. For the last 20 years, I've been living in English kind of countryside, villages.
Okay.
So I'm writing the migrants' experience from the English in the countryside.
Okay. And this next novel of yours will it be located in Kolkata or?
Yeah, it started from Kolkata, then Dhaka, and London.
Oh, okay. All right. So, all right. You make that. All right, Jenny. So, thank you very much. And Qazi Anis Ahmad, thank you very much. And I wish you good luck with your next novel. And I look forward to reading it. And I would like to thank the Bangla Academy for organizing this literary conference. And I hope that this will be an annual feature. And we will have international literary conferences every year to coincide with the book fair, the Boi Mela. I think the largest Boi Mela in the world, except I would make one request that in our Boi Mela, I do not know whether it has changed, we do not allow publishers from other countries to sell their books. And I think that is a great disadvantage. I would request the DG to open the Boi Mela to foreign publishers as well. I think that will really increase the significance of the Boi Mela, and we can proudly say that it is the biggest book fair in the world. Thank you very much. Oh.
সেটা হচ্ছে ঢাকা বুক ফেয়ার, যেটা ন্যাশনাল বুক সেন্টার অর্গানাইজ করে, তাই না শামসুজ্জামান সাহেব? ন্যাশনাল বুক ফেয়ার, এবং সেখানে আসে, এবং সেটাকে বরঞ্চ আমরা বলতে পারি যে তোমরা আরো বড় করে করো, আরো এটাকে গুছিয়ে করো, give inject more blood into it. কিন্তু এইটে, কারণ দেখুন না, এই যে বাংলা একাডেমি হয়েছে সেই 52 সাল 48 সাল থেকে এটাকে এইভাবেই আমরা রাখবার পক্ষপাতী, এভাবে থাকুক, এবং আন্তর্জাতিক বইমেলা যেটা আছে সেটাকে আরও সমৃদ্ধ কীভাবে করা যায় সে নিয়ে আমার বিশ্বাস the persons responsible for it, they're giving much thought. I'm sure this year we'll have one of the finest international book fair in Dhaka.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There was one question from the audience.
Personally would strongly recommend for any writer that if you have somebody who can act as a trusted editor for you, it's good to show your work to other people. I know that a lot of people feel very protective about their work and are hesitant to show, or even when suggestions are made, they feel like, no, but I'm very chechilam, which is fine. But it is important to be able to see it through somebody else's eyes and see if your intended effects are actually transmitting or not. It's not about taking their vision, it's still your vision, but hearing from someone else if it's really coming through or not. So for me, I go through many drafts myself, and at some point when I feel that it's finished or finished enough, I definitely like to get a read back from a couple of trusted friends.
Thank you very much. Thank participation from the audience. অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে. Thank you very, very much. Bye bye. খুদা হাফেজ.
ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you so much.
আমার কাছে কবিতার সংজ্ঞা। আমি দুটো কবিতা শোনাচ্ছি, আর আরও একবার সকলকে সাদর শুভেচ্ছা আর ধন্যবাদ জানাচ্ছি। এই লেখাটির নাম আগুন। তোমার কাছে সবার আগুন পৌঁছে দেব, যন্ত্রণা আর খিদের মতো টাটকা আগুন। আমায় তুমি ভালোই বাসো, এই তো অনেক। পাড়ার মোড়ের চায়ের দোকান, ঘুপচি সেলুন, সন্ধে বাজার, বিশুর কোচিং, জাগৃতি ক্লাব। তোমার আমার ব্যাপারটা ঠিক কেউ জানে না, কেবল জানি দিগন্তে যে আকাশ রেখা, তার ওপারেও অনেক অনেক মানুষ থাকে। তারাই জানে আমরা যে আজ পরস্পরকে, কারণ তারা একই রকম আগুন পোহায়, একটু খিদের, একটু হয়তো যন্ত্রণারও। তাদের আগুন তোমার কাছে পৌঁছে দেব। তুমি সেসব তোমার মধ্যে জমিয়ে রেখো, মুঠোর মধ্যে, না বালি নয়, জোরের মতো ঠিক সময় অন্ধকারে জ্বালিয়ে দেবে। এক দিগন্ত মোমের আলোয় দেখবে তখন সবার খিদে ঝলমলিয়ে উঠছে কেমন, যন্ত্রণারা দূরের হয়েও একই রকম। তুমি আমায় ভালোই বাসো, এই তো অনেক, কিন্তু তোমার ভালোবাসার একটু দূরে অনেক মানুষ দাঁড়িয়ে আছে, তাদের ডাকো। আর কিছু না, ভালোবাসার অন্ধকারে সবাই মিলে আগুন জ্বাললে ভালো দেখায়। আরেকটা লেখা পড়ছি, এখানে এসেও যা পরিস্থিতি দেখছি, কাঁটা তারের ওপারেও সেই পরিস্থিতির কোনো হেরফের নেই। আমার মনে হয় যে গোটা পৃথিবীতেই এখন এইরকম একটা অস্থির সময় চলছে। সেই সময় দাঁড়িয়ে কখনো কখনো নিজেদের খুব ব্যর্থ মনে হয়, যেটা হক ভাই বলছিলেন যে এতদিন ধরে এত যে লেখালেখি হলো, সে কি তবে সব জলে গেল? কিন্তু এই ব্যর্থতা বোধ থেকেও আমরা যেটা করি যে আবার গিয়ে আরো একটা কবিতায় লিখতে বসি, এছাড়া আমরা আর কি বা করতে পারি। তা একটা কবিতা এই সময়ের নামে, লেখাটার নাম কবরখানা। বিকেল নামছে কবরখানায়, কেউ কোথাও, আমরা দুজন আলস্য পা, গাছের ছায়া, আর কিছু না, নিজের মতো একটু সময়। পাখির ডাক আর পাতার গায়ে ঝিরিঝিরি, সবুজ ঘাসের এদিক ওদিক সাদা পাথর, নাম লেখা আর বয়স লেখা মৃতের ফলক। প্লেন উড়ে যায় মাথার ওপর, প্লেনের শব্দ মাথার ভেতর ঘুরতে থাকে যখন তুমি একটু কাছে আসবে বলে বায়না করো। আমরা যখন নিজের মতো অল্প আড়াল, মাথার মধ্যে প্লেনের শব্দ। প্লেনটা কোথায়? অন্য কোনো দেশ শহরে যুদ্ধে গেল? আজ এখানে হয়তো যখন হাতে স্পর্শ, দূরে কোথাও পাতার মতোই ঝরছে বোমা। জঙ্গি হানায় ৩০০ হত, ঘায়েল বহু। হয়তো তখন ফাটছে দেহ একের পর এক, ধ্বংসাবশেষ কুড়িয়ে নিচ্ছে তদন্ত দল, আবার একটা বিস্ফোরণের অপেক্ষাতে। একটা কি বেশ পাখি ডাকলো, পাতার হাওয়া। এই তো ধরা হাতের মধ্যে তোমার দুহাত। বিকেলের এই শেষ না হওয়া কবরখানায় আমরা দুজন কেমন জীবন বাঁচতে এলাম। সকলে ভালো থাকুন, এই সময়ের মধ্যেও শান্তিতে থাকুন। দেখা হবে।
এ পর্যায়ে এই সময়ের সাহিত্য থেকে পাঠ ও আলোচনা। এই পর্বে সভাপতিত্ব করবেন কবি প্রাবন্ধিক অধ্যাপক নারায়ণ সিংহ। আমি এখন অধ্যাপক নারায়ণ সিংহকে মঞ্চে এসে আসন গ্রহণের জন্য সবিনয় অনুরোধ করছি।
মাননীয় সভাপতি, উপস্থিত সুধীবৃন্দ, আমি আমার একটা ছোট গল্প পড়ব। গল্পটির নাম আলোকের এই ঝর্ণাধারা। ঈর্ষা করার মতো কিছুই নেই তার, তবু আমি তাকে হিংসা করি। হ্যাঁ, সত্যি সত্যি তাই, আমি তাকে হিংসাই করি। কেননা সারাক্ষণ সে শুধু হাসে, কোনো কারণ ছাড়া, প্ররোচনা ছাড়া, এমনি এমনি কেবল হাসে। মেয়েটি রূপবতী নয়, কখনো তাকে গুনগুন করেও গান গাইতে শুনিনি। বাড়িতেই থাকে সে সব সময়, চাকরি বাকরি কিছু করে না বলাই বাহুল্য। সুন্দর বা দামি কাপড় চোপড় কখনো পরতে দেখিনি, নিজের ঘরে কেই বা পরে সেসব। তাছাড়া আছেই বা কটা ভালো শাড়িও। অথবা আদৌ আছে কিনা তাই বা কে জানে। গয়না বলতে তো দু হাতে দুটো সরু সোনার চুড়ি আর কানে ছোট্ট দুটি মটর দানার মতো ঝোলানো সোনালি বল। সাজে না সে একেবারে, কিংবা সাজবার উপকরণ কিছু নেই ঘরে। চুল আঁচড়ে পিছনে একটা হাত খোপা বেঁধে রাখে প্রতিদিন, আর কপালে বড় আকারের খয়েরি রঙের একটি টিপ। এই তার সজ্জা। ষোড়শী সে নয়, বয়সন্ধির বয়সী হলে এমন ওলটপালট ব্যবহারের একটা অর্থ খুঁজে পাওয়া যেত, কিন্তু এই পরিণত বয়সে বিবাহিত এক সন্তানের জননী এই মেয়েটির কি হলো হঠাৎ? দিব্যি তো ছিল এতদিন। বয়স তার 30-এর কোঠায় তো বটেই, 40 ছুঁই ছুঁই করলেও অবাক হব না। তাও তো কমই বয়স বলতে হবে, আমার থেকে অন্তত 2 দশকের ছোট তো হবেই। কিন্তু কি হয়েছে তার? হঠাৎ এমন করে হাসতে শুরু করলো কেন? আগে তো এমন করতো না। ওরা আমার বাসার লাগোয়া ঘরটিতে ভাড়াটে হয়ে এসেছে, তা কমপক্ষে 9-10 মাস তো হলোই। কিন্তু কই, এমন করে আগে কখনো হাসতো না তো মেয়েটি। কি মাথাটা কি খারাপ হয়ে গেল নাকি হঠাৎ? একান্ত গৃহবধূ সে, বাইরে কোথাও যেতে হয় না আমার মতো, ঘরেই থাকে। হয়তো সে আমায় দেখিয়ে দিতে চাইছে তার অনন্ত স্বাধীনতা, তার অবাধ উন্মুক্ত জীবন, কেবল হেসে খেলে যাকে উড়িয়ে দেয়া যায়। সাধ্য কি আমি তাকে অনুকরণ করি, অনুসরণ করি? সবসময় এত খুশিতে যে সে থাকে, তার আসল রহস্যটা কি ভাবার চেষ্টা করি। জীবনে আনন্দের উপকরণ কি কি আছে তার, আর সেগুলো সব হঠাৎ করে এক্ষুনি আবিষ্কার করলো নাকি সে, না সেগুলো হঠাৎ এসে একত্রে হাজির হয়েছে তার সামনে? আমি জানতে আগ্রহী, কারণ আমি নিজেও কিছুটা হলেও আমি নিজেও হাসতে চাই বই কি। আমি মনে করার চেষ্টা করি ওর বয়স যখন পার করেছি আমি আমার জীবনের সেই সময়টার কথা, সে সবই স্পষ্ট মনে আছে। কই, তখনও তো এভাবে একটানা কয়েকদিন ধরে সারাক্ষণ খুব খুব করে হাসিনি, হাসতে পারিনি, ইচ্ছে হয়নি। হাসার মতো কোনো উপকরণ ছিল না, সময় ছিল না, জায়গা ছিল না, কারণ ছিল না, আসক্তি নয়, উপলক্ষও নয়। আচ্ছা, মেয়েটি নতুন করে প্রেমে পড়েনি তো? ছেলে কোলে দাঁড়িয়ে থাকে, দেখি তাকে প্রায়, কিন্তু আসলেই তো তার স্বামীকে তো কিছুদিন ধরে আর দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। গেল কোথায় লোকটি? আমি উকি ঝুঁকি মারি, ওর স্বামীকে খুঁজি, কিন্তু মেয়েটিকে দেখে চিন্তিত মনে হয় না। ওর ঘরে কোনো পুরুষ মানুষের আনাগোনা দেখি না, সে নিজেও যায় না কোথাও বাড়ি ছেড়ে। তাহলে সে শুধু হাসে, খিলখিল করে হাসে, মুষলধারায় বৃষ্টি পতনের শব্দের মতো হাসে, ফুরফুরে চৈতি হাওয়ায় যেন উড়ে যেতে যেতে হাসে, শুকনো পাতা খালি পায়ে মারিয়ে যাওয়ার কড়কড়ে শব্দের মতো করে হাসে। বজ্রপাতের সঙ্গে হাসে মেয়েটি, আকাশ জুড়ে বিদ্যুতের ঝিলিকের মতো হাসে, কালবৈশাখীর ঝড়ের সঙ্গে বাজি রেখে হাসে, নড়বড়ে কাঠের দরজা জানালাগুলো বন্ধ করতে করতে হাসে, পূর্ণিমার ফকফকে জ্যোৎস্নায় চরাচর ভেসে গেলে হাসে, হাসে অন্ধকারে একা একা ঘোর অমাবস্যায় চাঁদহীন শূন্য আকাশের দিকে তাকিয়ে তাকিয়ে হাসে। দুবারের মাঝখানে দাঁড়িয়ে আছে বেশ বড়সড় এক ঝুমকো জবা গাছ, সাদা আর লাল রঙের মেলামেশা মাখামাখিতে সৃষ্ট উজ্জ্বল আলপনা কাটা নরম পাপড়ির অজস্র ফুল ফুটে